Origins and outbreak. World War I, also known as the Great War, erupted in 1914 after a complex web of alliances, militarism, nationalism, and imperial tensions reached a breaking point. The immediate spark was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist, on June 28, 1914. This event led Austria-Hungary to issue an ultimatum to Serbia, which, when partially rejected, resulted in a declaration of war. The intricate system of alliances quickly escalated the conflict. Russia mobilized in defense of Serbia, Germany declared war on Russia, and soon after on Russia's ally, France. When Germany violated Belgian neutrality to invade France, Britain entered the war. What began as a regional dispute rapidly expanded into a global conflict involving all major European powers, their colonies, and later, nations from around the world. Trench warfare and stalemate. By late 1914, the Western Front had stabilized into a grueling stalemate characterized by trench warfare, a new and horrific form of combat. Soldiers lived and fought in deep trenches, facing barbed wire, machine gun fire, artillery bombardments, and the constant threat of poison gas. Battles such as the Marne, Ypres, and Verdun resulted in massive casualties, with little territorial gain. The Battle of Verdun in 1916, for instance, saw French and German forces engage in a brutal confrontation lasting almost 10 months, resulting in over 700,000 casualties without decisive victory for either side. Similarly, the Battle of the Somme, intended to break the deadlock, became infamous for the scale of its casualties, particularly on the first day when British forces suffered around 60,000 casualties. These battles exemplified the futility and devastation of trench warfare, where advances were measured in yards and achieved at a horrific human cost. Global conflict and the Eastern Front. While the Western Front epitomized the static nature of World War I, the Eastern Front saw more fluid and dynamic movements. Here, the Central Powers, primarily Germany and Austria-Hungary, engaged with Russia. Early Russian advances were countered by decisive German victories at the battles of Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes, which significantly weakened Russian forces. The war on the Eastern Front was characterized by vast distances and shifting front lines, contrasting sharply with the entrenched stagnation in the West. Additionally, the war spread beyond Europe. The Ottoman Empire, siding with the Central Powers, fought against the Allied forces in campaigns across the Middle East, including the Gallipoli campaign where Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, ANZAC, troops fought valiantly but ultimately unsuccessfully against Ottoman defenders. The global nature of the conflict was further underscored by battles in Africa and Asia, where colonial troops played significant roles. Technological innovations and warfare. World War I was marked by significant technological and tactical innovations. The introduction of tanks, initially deployed by the British at the Battle of the Somme in 1916, aimed to break through trench defenses but had limited early success due to mechanical failures and tactical deployment issues. Aircraft, first used for reconnaissance, evolved into fighters and bombers, adding a new dimension to warfare. The war also saw the extensive use of submarines, with German U-boats targeting Allied shipping, leading to significant losses and provoking international outrage, particularly with the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915. Chemical warfare, introduced by the Germans with chlorine gas at Ypres in 1915, added a new and terrifying element to the battlefield, prompting the development of gas masks and protective measures. These innovations reflected the industrialized nature of the conflict, where technological advances were rapidly integrated into military strategy, often with devastating human consequences. The home front and economic impact. The war had profound effects on civilian populations and economies. Governments across Europe and beyond mobilized not just armies but entire societies for the war effort, leading to increased state control over economies, rationing of food and materials, and widespread propaganda campaigns to maintain public support. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking on roles traditionally reserved for men, which had lasting social impacts. The economic strain of the war was immense, with nations accumulating vast debts. The British blockade of Germany and the German U-boat campaign against Allied shipping aimed to starve the enemy into submission, leading to severe shortages and suffering among civilian populations. The war also triggered significant political changes, the most notable being the Russian Revolution in 1917, which led to the fall of the Tsarist regime and the rise of the Bolsheviks, who ultimately withdrew Russia from the war through the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in 1918. American entry and the final offensives. The entry of the United States into the war in 1917 provided a significant boost to the Allied powers. Initially neutral, the U.S. was drawn into the conflict by a combination of German unrestricted submarine warfare and the Zimmermann Telegram, in which Germany proposed a military alliance with Mexico against the United States. American troops and resources began arriving in significant numbers in 1918, bolstering the exhausted Allied forces. The fresh American troops played a crucial role in the 100 Days Offensive, a series of decisive Allied attacks that pushed the German armies back and broke their will to fight. The Allied offensives in the summer and autumn of 1918, combined with internal strife and economic hardship within the Central Powers, led to the collapse of German resistance. The signing of the armistice on November 11, 1918, marked the end of fighting on the Western Front and the conclusion of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles and aftermath. The peace settlement, primarily negotiated at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, culminated in the Treaty of Versailles. The treaty imposed harsh terms on Germany, including significant territorial losses, military restrictions, and substantial reparations payments. The principle of self-determination led to the redrawing of borders and the creation of new nations in Europe and the Middle East. However, the treaty's punitive measures and the exclusion of key nations from meaningful participation in the peace process sowed seeds of resentment and instability. The League of Nations, established to prevent future conflicts, was weakened by the absence of major powers, notably the United States, which rejected the treaty and the League. The economic and political turmoil in the post-war period, exacerbated by the Great Depression, set the stage for the rise of totalitarian regimes in Germany, Italy, and Japan, eventually leading to World War II. Legacy and long-term impact. World War I left an indelible mark on the 20th century. It led to the dismantling of empires, including the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, and German empires, and fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape. The war accelerated technological and medical advancements and prompted significant social changes, including the role of women in society and the rise of nationalist movements in colonial territories. The psychological impact of the war, epitomized by the concept of the lost generation, reflected widespread disillusionment and trauma. Literature, art, and philosophy of the post-war period grappled with the war's devastation and the search for meaning in its aftermath. The legacy of World War I, often referred to as the war to end all wars, ironically highlighted the unresolved issues and tensions that would lead to even greater conflict 2 decades later. Its profound effects on international relations, military strategy, and societal structures continue to be studied and understood as foundational to the modern world.